Another interesting feature we get when we look at long-run models is something called crowding out. And if we look at how we divide output among different demands for GDP at full employment. So remember, when we looked at total GDP, we were able to figure out who was buying it. This was the expenditures approach for adding up GDP. And we had GDP, or output, was consumption plus investment plus government purchases plus net exports. Now let's look at a closed economy first, where we have no net exports. So in a closed economy, it's an economy without international trade. We would say that output is C plus I plus G. Now, we just looked at our long-run models, and we know that output is going to be equal to potential output because we're at equilibrium in our labor market. So if we have a change in something on the right-hand side of this equation, and there's no change on the left-hand side, what's going to happen? Well, we're going to have not an equal sign anymore. So suppose we thought that government expenditures went up. Well, if there's no change in potential output, then Y, or output, is not going to change. If that's the case, and government expenditures rises, well, we must have a drop in the other things that make up output in order to make it still the same level of output. This is called crowding out. It's a reduction in investment or some other component of GDP caused by an increase in government spending. And the reason this happens is because output in the long run, or in our classical model, is fixed at full employment. So when we get an increase in one component of output, the other components must fall. Generally, when we talk about crowding out, we're talking about a drop in investment. Has this happened? Certainly it has. Right? So when we look at World War II, during World War II, the share of government spending in GDP rose precipitously because we were spending a lot of money fighting World War II. And what did we see happen to the other parts of GDP? Well, the share of consumption in GDP went down. The same is true for the share of investment. Government expenditure share of GDP went up. The share of investments of GDP went down. This is also true in an open economy. And an open economy is one economy with international trade, and now we have GDP is C plus I plus G plus NX, or consumption, investment, government expenditures, and net exports. If we have an increase in government expenditures, we could see a decrease in consumption or investment or net exports. And so an increase in government expenditures doesn't have to crowd out consumption and investment. It might crowd out net exports instead.